let's start with the begging bowl section. You're probably used to it by now if you're a regular listener. If you're not, this is the housekeeping end of things, where we ask you, the listener, to be a subscriber on your various podcast platforms. Discussions on the YouTube page, which you can see our lovely faces on, particularly welcome to. We're a self-funded independent startup, and this is one of the means to start up, to get yourself up the algorithm, to grow the audience, which is what we'd like to do, because, and we say every time, we really enjoy doing this. There's a lot of enthusiasm behind the project. Let's keep growing. We're pro-growth, in this circumstance at least. If we're anti-growth, that's another discussion we'll have later on in this expanded podcast universe. But anyway, on with the show. Here we are at Libero. Of course, we discuss what is it? It's the most important of the least important things. I keep getting it mixed up, as I think Lemmy from Motorhead once said. Do you know what? We're going to start here, and I'm going to report this. There's been a schism in the Libero supergroup. There's a split between us. And I'll tell you what that split is. It's about the bloody Club World Cup. The split is between those of us, those who've sucked on the teat of the Coppa Gianni and have actually enjoyed this competition. Now, Jack Pickbrook, a man with stateside connections, I'd say he's a moderate on this, but he's going that way. But James Horncastle, the Miami sound machine himself, he's fully gung-ho, isn't he? He's all over it.
Big as Rory? I'm not sure. I think Rory's...
Rory, after a couple of days, you could tell. He's already booking his flight to the renewal in Qatar next time around. He's all over this. Do you know what? They've even praised the TV coverage, which I think those of us in the UK have had a slight issue with. A tip out there to DAZN, my friends at DAZN. A pop-up all the way through a TV broadcast makes it look quite cheap and nasty. It also reminds me of those nasty things behind the Fire Stick we're not supposed to watch, or those feeds that you get for 3 p.m. kickoffs that, again, we're not supposed to watch. Things popping up in the corner. It's not great, is it? But anyway, but I should mention, actually, the two guests we've got here, here's a man who's very much in the no corner for the Club World Cup. That's Miguel Delaney. In fact, he's so far in the no corner, he's dialing in from Switzerland. And Jonathan Wilson, recently spliced. He's with us. I'm presuming, Jonathan, you've not watched much of this. You've been quaffing and scoffing away around Europe, haven't you?
I have. I've just come back from my honeymoon. What I did notice, I was in Antwerp in Belgium, the land of my fathers, right. Or a great grandfather, rather than any of my other fathers. And in the on the TV in the hotel, there were 6 channels showing the Women's Euros and no channels showing, I can't remember which Club World Cup game it was, but I was trying to watch and I couldn't. So yeah, the only game I actually watched in full was the semi-final between Chelsea and Fluminense.
And that was when you were back in England, yes, right?
I got back, yeah. So I endured that pop. That pop-up apparently has not been there regularly on DAZN. It was just there last night. We were recording this on a Wednesday, we should say.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it before, but
very annoying.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Listen, I think James Horncastle has converted us all to being Serie A fans, but and we're sort of up for next season. But maybe the pop-ups put me off. Maybe the price too. But anyway. And I should say, I'm John Brewin. I didn't get asked to go to the States either. So let's continue. I think after Wednesday, the team on Wednesday discussed the Gianni's dream, and we'll be discussing it again, I think, at the end. But I think we'll set that aside for the moment, because I think there's been enough discussion of it. You know, if they can make it there, they'll make it anywhere in New Jersey. So let's get down to the real business of the summer, the transfer business. That's what we're all about here. And we're going to talk about a club whom are, they are a club of whom have had a really busy week and have had a successful week. Martin Zubimendi, a player much wanted across Europe, wanted by Real Madrid, wanted by Liverpool, and he's signed for Arsenal. We think Victor Gyökeres is just about done. And remember, last season it was all about players that they didn't sign. Now it's about the players that they have signed. So, Miguel, let's start with you. Have Arsenal won the transfer window? I mean, they've made their late run on July the 9th. To win. Because you've got to win it early, haven't you? You've got to win it early.
You do. Yeah. You get that statement in. I mean, the entire concept of winning the transfer window is nonsense, isn't it? Really, given that
Yes.
it's just going to be dictated by whether a player settles. And you say they do actually sign Gyökeres. Yes, it's a big signing, and they finally get the striker that the fans have wanted and Arteta has wanted. But will he adapt? Obviously, there are, as good as he might be, and obviously I'm not precluding this, there are a fair amount of red flags there from the fact there's not actually that much interest in him. Other clubs have balked at the price. There have been some questions about elements of his game, and also he's now 27, and virtually all of his goals have come in Portugal while he's been at Sporting, which doesn't necessarily have a great kind of how to put it, translation factor, I don't know if that's the right phrase, into the Premier League. But anyway, we're probably getting ahead of ourselves there. I mean, the other side with Arsenal, of course, is that any number 9 they buy mightn't necessarily start all games because Kai Havertz is there. And Arteta, for all the kind of debate around him, Arteta loves him because Havertz absolutely gets how Arteta wants to press, which is arguably more important than having a finisher. And I think maybe that's where Arsenal's business could be so important for the next season and why it feels so substantial. Because towards the end of last season, affected by injuries, one of the kind of primary flaws with Arteta's team is he felt like they became a bit predictable in attack because they really only had two angles or two kind of sources of kind of ingenuity. They were over dependent on Saka and Odegaard, especially with Havertz injured. Whereas now suddenly, if they finish this window with say, so they'll have Havertz coming back, they'll get one number 9, be it Gyökeres or Sesko. It's possible Gyökeres will be done by the time this goes out. I'm actually a little bit dubious to that. There was no progress on Tuesday. They want another wide forward. With Madueke, who's been one of the names mentioned, Rodrigo's been floated around, and then I think what's really interesting, the real wild card here, in terms of at least kind of what they were planning, is Eze, because the Arsenal's budget initially extended to a central midfielder and a forward, and then any big signings after that had to come from sales. But from what I've heard, they've been looking at all sorts of ways that they can do Eze as well as that. And so if they get Eze, I mean, like he is one of the kind of the special players in the Premier League at the moment, and it will be a little bit of a shame if kind of, because I do like this idea that there are stars outside the kind of the big powerful clubs. But if Arsenal get that, then they go from kind of Saka and Odegaard at the end of last season, suddenly potentially having angles of attack coming from everywhere, or kind of options coming from everywhere. So that's why it would feel a substantial window, but I think there's still a lot to be done before we get from here to there.
So you don't think they'll be partying in the streets outside the Emirates then? Which, I mean, we have seen that in the past, haven't we? When they've made signings, Mesut Ozil comes to mind.
Ozil was the big one, wasn't it?
Ozil was, yeah.
Well,
John Cross, our friend, of course, adding an umlaut on his on the O in his name was one of my favourite moments ever on Twitter. Actually, superb.
This is a slight tangent, and maybe it's slightly unfair on Arsenal fans, but are they the club that get most animated about transfers just because of the debate that's gone on at the club for about 15 years and right back to, spend some fucking money, Wenger?
I think that's it, isn't it? That I think now probably not, but certainly, 5-10 years ago, there was a real frustration. I think partly caused by the fact they had to restrict their transfer spending because of the repayments on the stadium. That I think there was a sense they got a little bit left behind in that period. Maybe Wenger's was no longer at the very peak of his powers by the time they got into the new stadium. So maybe that would have happened anyway. But I think that sort of mass delirium, the dancing in the streets when Ozil signed, was this sort of relief that we're back to being able to sign players in a way we were doing a decade ago. But I think I sort of feel two things about these Arsenal signings this summer. I mean, I think Zubimendi is they needed that. They basically needed a Jorginho who can run a bit, and I think that'll help Declan Rice a lot. I think his role will become much more clear. I think having that passer there alongside him will and somebody who with such sort of tactical understanding will really help. The centre forward, the extra cover out wide makes complete sense. I'm just slightly sceptical. I mean, I suspect from what you were saying, you share my skepticism about Gyökeres. And even about Madueke, to be honest. I mean, Gyökeres, the thing that I kept on hearing from another Premier League club who were definitely sniffing around him and have signed two centre forwards this summer was we don't think he gets a shot off quick enough. That it's fine when you're playing on the break. It's fine when you're playing for Coventry. It's probably fine in the Portuguese league. But when you're playing against a low block, as Arsenal will in 3/4 of a game we play in the league next season, does he have that capacity to work tiny opportunities to get a shot away that a really top striker would? And then Madueke as well. I mean, just because Chelsea have given up on you, or maybe given up's too strong, but just because Chelsea are prepared to release you doesn't necessarily mean you're not a good player. They've released or allowed or sold lots of good players, and clearly part of their whole transfer strategy is based on a churn for PSR reasons. But again, the thing that I kept hearing about Madueke is his centre of gravity is not sufficiently over the ball. But you compare him to, say, Jamie Gittins. Apparently, the reason why they think Gittins is better, and obviously they do play on different sides as a rule, although Madueke can play on both sides, is that Gittins has a centre of gravity more over the ball when he runs, whereas Madueke tends to be sort of almost like wagging a leg at it. That's clearly an exaggeration, but if you're thinking in the terms of the very top level, that he sort of plays with the ball away from him in the way that Gittins has it right tight to him. So they're two question marks, I think, about the players they appear to be trying to bring in.
Just the Gyökeres one is really interesting as well. I think what it potentially says about Arsenal's direction and the current priorities. Because, I mean, look, I think it's fairly well known, and I've got a lot of detail in this, that they've been going for Sesko for 18 months. They came pretty close to a deal last summer, except for all sorts of reasons, both the kind of Leipzig's terms, and also the player himself, who wanted another year to develop. And there was a belief on Arsenal's side that the deal would be done this summer. Now, it did. I mean, it suddenly went from that to evolving into this decision between Sesko and Gyökeres. And I do think that coincides with the arrival of Andrea Berta as sporting director. Now, Berta, one of the big reasons that Berta has been brought in actually is because of because of PSR churn. He's someone who knows how to get deals done. He's got a lot of relationships and contacts, and that's important suddenly in a climate where you do have to constantly keep moving. And Arsenal maybe had a few issues, certainly kind of maybe moving out players, and also, as we've seen, getting purchases done. But I think the key with this decision between Sesko and Gyökeres is, I think from what I've heard, Arsenal's analytics team and all their kind of data people value them quite similar right now. Sesko, obviously the difference there is Sesko is now just gone 22, whereas Gyökeres is 27, as we discussed. So Sesko is seen as potentially having a higher ceiling, but a little bit more different to get right now. There's currently a €10 million difference between Leipzig and Arsenal. Whereas Gyökeres, obviously, the deal can be done what feels a bit more early. I think that if they do end up going for Gyökeres, I think it says a few things. One, I think it's a signal of Berta's influence at the club. And two, there's obviously this whole dynamic around Arsenal, which is when it's no longer about... because I suppose what they've been trying to do for the past 3 years is gradually build a young team that can all come together, a little bit like a Dortmund. But unlike a Dortmund, Arsenal do actually have the financial clout and the stature of club to keep most of their players. At least they have done for now. Whereas suddenly this feels in a bit of an abrupt turn, and it maybe points to some of the kind of the pressure surrounding the club right now, like all the noise from last season, that the time has come, and that's why they can't wait around. They can't necessarily kind of show the same patience for a forward to develop. And which is why they're gone all in for Gyökeres. Now, of course, the flip side to that is people do speak about how there is a potential that if you get Sesko now, he could be an Isaac in 3-4 years. But I think it's a very interesting dynamic around the club.
Yeah, I was going to say about that. Berta, that influence is clear, isn't it? Atletico Madrid were never afraid of signing a player towards the peak, were they? Or we think of the transfer business as essentially a trade in younger players these days, don't we? And then the players beyond that, they're starting to deal in contracts and maybe going on frees and stuff like that. And we're looking at, there's this panic, isn't it, that Jack Grealish is 30, and what will happen to him after this? And it's a big part of football now about the age profile of players. Look at the Zubimendi deal. They've done that deal, haven't they? They've paid a little bit more than the release clause because they can pay it in instalments. You call that Klarna, don't you? See that on the internet if you want to pay for your trainers over 3 months or whatever. We saw it this week. We saw Forest. They showed off Edu. He's gone to there to work for Big Vange up in Nottingham. We'll have to see how that goes. I think the point you make there. With Sesko. Actually, Sesko and Gyökeres, I've seen both of them play. I was just thinking about this. One, Gyökeres is a sub for Coventry, came on late against Wrexham. He was way, way above the talent of anyone else on the pitch. And I've seen Sesko come on as a sub, Leipzig's final game of last season. I'm afraid, now it might have been because I was refreshed, I didn't notice him. I didn't really see... I did, because you think of that, all the players that because they had Xavi Martins or whatever, who is a very, very good player. I didn't really notice him standing out. And I think the point you're making there is last season it felt to me that Arsenal put that pressure on themselves. This would be the season. This would be the season that they would crack Manchester City. Manchester City cracked, but Arsenal didn't get there.
Yeah. And
so this, more than last season, is the one that they have to get it done. And it feels like the transfer business points towards that. Jonathan?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And I think it actually happens quite a lot with teams that they do the patient build-up and then they get to the point where we've actually got to do this. We can't... Yeah. Sometimes, the jam has to arrive today at some point. We can't just keep on telling ourselves it's coming tomorrow. But on that point of Sesko, I've actually seen him, I think, 3 times live. So I saw him for Leipzig in the Champions League when he looked useful but quite raw. But I was actually really impressed by him for Slovenia in the Euros in Germany. I thought as a lone front runner, or lone-ish front runner, and that's the way that Slovenia team played, midfield playing quite deep, he was much better than I expected. I'm just not sure that's quite what Arsenal need. They're not going to be playing with 9 men behind the ball, knocking up to a long... He's a little bit Salomon Rondon in the way he could hold the ball up, the way he ran the channels. And that I yield to no man in my respect for Salomon Rondon.
The non-scoring striker, we all... But I also, Kyle of the affair, yeah.
But I also have this slight concern. You know how completely... even the fact that we're talking about, we've seen these players a handful of times live, and obviously we've seen them on TV as well, but you never get quite as full a picture on TV. But you can... I completely accept Zlatan Ibrahimovic was a good player. I never saw him play well live. I must have seen him like 25 times live. Never saw him play well. So that does influence it. My other problem with Sesko, this is ridiculous. If this makes me sound too ridiculous, please edit it out.
No.
I don't know, a year or 18 months ago, I had a dream. I remember very clearly, where I was pursuing Benjamin Sesko. I was trying to track him down. I was doing some actual journalism. And I tracked him down to a remote...
That is a dream, yeah. What wild fantasies you dream, Jonathan?
I track him down to this remote farm. I see him in Slovenia, certainly somewhere very alpine. And I go into this barn, and this enormous turkey, like this 6 foot tall turkey, comes charging out and knocks me over and runs out.
Should you be revealing this?
Sesko is just a massive turkey. And I'm afraid that it's very hard to kind of shake that image from my head.
If any listening psychotherapists want to get in touch with interpretation of Jonathan's dream, feel free.
I think we have it there. Sesko is a turkey. So there's the headline. So well done, Jonathan, for that.
Just
I was going to say, Miguel. Yeah, Miguel. Go. Yeah.
as Jonathan was speaking, I was getting live information there. Apparently, the Gyökeres, it won't be live by the time this comes out, but apparently the Gyökeres deal is in some difficulty.
Right. Okay. Well, there we go. Okay. There we go.
Now, again, there has been an undercurrent through all this that there is a belief from some people in the industry that Arsenal want Sesko. That they still would have seen Sesko as a priority.
It's
but
a smoking out, though. It's a smoking out job.
Yeah. I mean, but this is pure speculation. But just on sorry, at the very least, kind of the idea that they're smoking out is pure speculation. But it's going to be interesting what happens next. But just on Jonathan's point there about kind of we want the jam now. To be fair, is there not a slight danger as well, though, that I mean, you yourself have written more than anyone about the third season. It might change a bit with kind of the way modern football has evolved, but this Arsenal group has now been together as a kind of a title force, or at least maybe in its final form, since 2022. That's 3 years. And as Pochettino found at Spurs, and what was an excellent team, got to 86 points, and actually an achievement I still think is one of the best in the modern Premier League, just because of how difficult it is for a club of, or at least a team put together with those resources to get that many points. There's suddenly that danger just stops. It goes stale, which is why the closer you get or the longer you go, you eventually actually have to seize. And I know that's more difficult in a context with City, with kind of, with what City have been, and also that the Premier League does have more challenges. And we could have 4 quite stacked teams this season in Liverpool, Arsenal, City, and Chelsea. But yeah, it's suddenly that kind of that urgency that abruptly takes over.
Well, Jonathan, I think the name we should mention here, of course, is Mikel Arteta. The pressure, there's pressure he puts on himself. Let's say that. And he's someone that doesn't wear that pressure particularly lightly, does he? But it does feel within the Arsenal fan group that maybe there's a few doubts coming in. I mean, there were some that doubted him from the very start. But what's your take on that?
It's always difficult to know how widespread that is, because the most critical voices are the ones you notice, the ones that shout the loudest. So I don't think they're going to be. It's not even going to be like the sort of the anti-Wenger stuff from even 2 or 3 years before he went. I don't think there's a mass movement for Arteta to be out. I think if say they lost 4 of the first 10 league games of the season, those doubts might be expressed a bit more vocally. I still think there's a widespread and I think correct sort of a respect for what he's done, but frustration does build. So I mean, if they finish second again for 4th season running, which I guess is, as Miguel says, I think I'm not sure necessarily include Chelsea as a top challenger, but they're not far off. So I think you've got the 3 obvious challenges: Liverpool, Arsenal, City. Chelsea absolutely could win the league, but I think they're at a level of likelihood below those other 3. It's not easy. You can just be Arteta. He's almost like he's like the Andy Murray of Premier League management. He's just unlucky. He's around at a time with loads of other good clubs. If he'd existed in the mid-90s, it'd have been a straight fight with United, and he may well have been much more successful. I think or Klopp as well as would have won more than one title in a different era. It's really hard to win the league at the minute in the Premier League. They've come really close, and they've improved a lot in his. How long has he been in charge now? 5-6 years.
2019. December 2019.
6 years. So they're clearly in a better position now than they were then. But at some point, people want some sort of return on that. They want some concrete delivery.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose Mikel Arteta's almost in this position of the Ramon Pulidor to Jacques Anquetil, isn't he? At this point, and something you drove out that, Miguel. I feel personally that the best football I've seen Arsenal play since the Wenger days was that 22-23 season. Yeah. But actually, it was the bit where they build up towards the World Cup. Before the World Cup, they were absolutely sensational, like a pressing machine, and it felt like Qatar 2022 took the wind out of the sails. Obviously, Gabriel Jesus got injured. We've never really seen the same of him since then. And since then, they've tried to do various things. And one of the things I think our friend Nick Ames has always pointed out is that Arteta appears to get bored of certain players. Like Jesus was one of them. Flavours of the month sort of come in and out, don't they? Martinelli was a big favourite, and he sort of dropped in form. And yeah, Arteta, it appears to me. I mean, we've all been to the press conferences. He's a pretty austere type of character. When you speak to him, he's not that friendly. He's very driven. There's a very much high performance vibe about them. How long can that last? Is he a decent enough manager to carry this through?
I mean, I think that's maybe a bigger question. But maybe the more pertinent one right now is, I suppose, like just, if to what level Arsenal maybe, and as much the fan base as the club, say, accept a situation where they're just consistent, where it's consistently second or third place, where it almost becomes like a modern version of, say, the team that Liam Brady was in the late 70s, early 80s, a really good, respected side. But, I remember I used to ghost Liam's column for the Sunday Tribune years ago, and he would always do. They were just always missing that element, and there's almost kind of a potential mirror to that now, because although Arsenal are a modern super club, who one of the clubs involved in putting together the Super League, right now at this moment of history, they're not as wealthy, say, as Liverpool or City. So their wage bill is actually substantially lower. Now that might change as bonuses kick in. They actually have to keep players together. But it's a bit of a differential that translates into the table. I know people don't like to talk about this sort of stuff because it's cold and it sounds like making excuses. But we've discussed in the pod before how there's a 90% correlation between your wage bill and your league finish, and working in that context can be difficult. Or at least kind of poses new challenges, I'd say, especially in a kind of a financially stratified game. And I do think some of the decisions that Arteta has made, from speaking to people at the club, is a response to that. So say, specifically what you mentioned there, that 22-23 season, I think he got a bit spooked by how that ended. And how he felt they were a brilliant team playing one way, but that one way was dependent on a core group of players. And you can't keep that going indefinitely. So hence he tried to kind of offer different variations, so they could do that, but they could also be kind of a team more built on a kind of a defensive foundation. They could play in a low block or a mid block. Sorry to use those terms. But also one of the things that Arteta has become absolutely obsessed with, and this is obviously kind of fed into other fan frustration, is that he wants to basically have an almost limitless number of potential midfield configurations. So not just that he could have any three playing in the middle, but also that those three can play like in multiple different roles. They have been quite a science-led club under him in terms of the amount they kind of analyse. Well, if the ball is lost in kind of this part of the pitch, how many seconds does it take us to reconfigure in a totally different way to block out an attack? And so it has become quite important at Arsenal that the players they sign internalise this sort of information, which is another reason he absolutely loves Kai Havertz. And I think that did play in, say, one of the issues of last season, that when they'd lost some of their attackers through injuries, they probably lent way too much on defence and set pieces.
Well, it was funny you mentioned, when Liam Brady left Arsenal, they became boring Arsenal, didn't they, for much of the 80s? And actually, the Arsenal that I most enjoyed was that George Graham boring, and who actually were full of good footballers, just as the current team is, but had a sort of way of playing. And it feels to me like Arteta was almost bringing Arsenal back, as I recall it, before the Wenger flowing continental style. That's not to say that Wenger's team couldn't mix it. I mean, they were a hard team, but they've gone a bit more, I would say one-dimensional, but the dimensions are quite crude at times, aren't they? The way that they play.
Yeah, I think they can be. A lot of what Arteta does can be prescriptive, it feels like that.
Yes.
It can be quite. The one thing I would say in the defence there is that I think when they have their best attackers back or more options in attack, I think we will see more of a return to what we saw in 2020, 22-23, but as a team that can mix it more. And who knows, I mean, that could end up being crucial to any title race. I mean, actually, one of the biggest things with Arteta is keeping players fit now. I mean, that became one of the stories of last season, and how Liverpool won the league. Liverpool were able to keep Van Dijk, the two best outfield players, the two big points winners, Van Dijk and Salah, on the pitch basically consistently. I think they were the two Premier League players with the most minutes, including goalkeepers, until 1st of March, which is basically when Liverpool won the league.
Well, I mean, I think that touches on, one of the reasons why Arsenal have not won the league yet, which is that they are so bad at controlling games that they have this ridiculous capacity to shoot themselves in the foot. The number of games I saw them at last season where they were totally on top. Oh, we conceded. Like the Aston Villa game, which it was towards the end of January, wasn't it? The same day when Liverpool scored twice in injury time at Brentford, Arsenal were 2-0 up against Villa, and suddenly had 10 minutes in a game they were completely on top of. 10 minutes where they let into and Villa hit the post, so they could easily have lost that game. And so that day felt key in the title race, because rather than Liverpool dropping 2 points and Arsenal closing the gap, suddenly Liverpool extend the lead. But there's so many matches we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years where Arsenal have been on top. I think the Brentford game where Raya made that bizarre mistake, the Bayern game season before last, where they just do stupid things, and they've got to get that mentality back, or that sort of George Graham mentality of not giving up daft goals, even if that means being a little bit more. That's the paradox of Arsenal. Is this Arsenal are at times quite boring, but also weirdly self-destructive, and those two things together are not helpful. But I think there's also then, and you touched on this, and I agree with you. It's a huge topic, and maybe it's too big to go into in detail here. But what happens when you've had a manager who's been at the club 6 years, and a lot of the players have been there for a long period, and it hasn't brought success, especially when he's a figure as intense as Arteta. Now, intensity clearly is one of the things you need in a football manager to win leagues. There's very few managers. Carlo Ancelotti maybe is an exception, but his record in terms of winning leagues till he went to Real Madrid was not particularly good. That intensity is part of what you need, but it can also grate on players if you're not getting the success. And I do wonder, all that high performance stuff, the brain and the heart walking hand in hand, the pickpockets nicking your wallets at the team meal and whatever. At what point do the players go, "What? Hang on, what? This is nonsense. What's going on here?" I mean, I don't know if have you seen the clip when Gareth Ainsworth went to QPR, and it did all the stuff that worked at Wickham. You look at the QPR players, go, hang on, who is? What is this?
I mean, he's honest enough. Miguel,
without becoming another podcast that endlessly talks about Manchester United in the 90s, didn't Ferguson say that one of his greatest challenges was actually coming up with new stories to connect the players and motivate them? So remember, what some of them laughing about the amount of times they'd heard the geese story, but the geese flying in unison. And I suppose that's maybe kind of a more a traditional football man version of high performance.
The stories of Gordon Strachan throwing his Harry Lauder Glaswegian folk songs out of the window of a coach because he'd heard them so often that this was an early attempt to get the lads on side. Now, with Arsenal, we must mention a story that broke last week. No, cannot go into it for legal reasons, is the Thomas Partey story. He's, of course, won't be part of the squad next season. It's probably worth reading the CPS statement on this to tell you why we can't discuss it. We remind everyone that criminal proceedings are active. The defendant has the right to a fair trial. We know there will be significant public interest in this announcement, but it's absolutely vital there is no reporting, commentary or sharing of information online which could anyway prejudice these proceedings. There has been a lot of commentary. We won't be doing it at the moment. Let's wait and see how that plays out. Jonathan, you wanted to introduce us to one of your friends in history, Bella Gutman, and your theories are based on the great man.
Well, no, to pick up Miguel's point about the third season being fatal, and so it's essentially there's two elements there. Gutman goes on to explain it in some detail, but one is at that point that you made about that Fergie had made about how do you motivate them? How do you find new stories to connect with the team? That basically teams heard everything you've got to say, they're bored of it. But he also, and I think this is quite a key point, that he says a football coach is like a lion tamer, and as soon as the lion sees a glimmer of doubt, you're done for. And so if a team starts to doubt you, you can't get back from that. And I do think that's a danger of any manager who keeps coming close. No matter what your starting point is, even though Arteta has clearly improved Arsenal over the last 5 or 6 years, the fact that they keep coming second, are there players in that dressing room who are starting to say, is this guy, and it's such a ludicrous phrase, it's a phrase that doesn't mean anything, is this guy a winner? Jose Mourinho had the reputation of being a winner long after he ceased to win things.
Yeah.
I think there's a danger that Arteta is the other way. That even though he's clearly very, very good at what he does, he's clearly made Arsenal better. I think until they actually win something, there's a real danger that there is that doubt that somehow he doesn't have this bizarre mystical quality that people ascribe to coaches of winning. And this idea of being a winner, it's such nonsense. Jack Nicklaus was brought in by Rory McIlroy to teach him to be a winner. All the stuff. Oh yeah, Jack Nicklaus won more tournaments, not majors now, but more tournaments. Oh yeah, actually, does he win more tournaments? He won more tournaments than anybody else in history. He also finished second more than anybody else and third more than anybody else. He was just really good at golf. He wasn't a great winner. He was a great golfer. And I think it's so easy to ascribe on the basis of one or two seasons, oh yeah, he's got what it takes to get him over the line. And I think very, very few coaches, very few players actually have that special quality.
I think I broadly agree with you on that. But I do wonder then whether perception can start to have a psychological effect on a team that can actually make it true.
Yeah.
And I think there are rare cases where the sheer force of personality and will. Maybe this actually isn't as relevant in the modern game as it was in a game that was more basically you put 11 players out on the pitch. They have more autonomy over their own role. So the key to a manager is basically psychological motivation. Which is obviously part of Fergie's great success. But I think it can if the players feel that the manager doesn't have that force of personality, charisma, whatever you want to call it, it can maybe start to have a longer term effect. Even if the modern game has eroded it a bit.
No, I think that's totally true. This is the point I make about Arteta. There's a danger players start to buy into that, even though I actually think it's something that we've sort of made true when it doesn't actually exist. And if people are actually rational about it, because we're not, and footballers aren't rational, and fans aren't rational, and people aren't rational.
So Jonathan's just conveyed this image to me of Mikel Arteta as the sort of Colin Montgomery or Jimmy White of. The thing is, it's funny that so. I mean, think of like people that win after all these times. Tom Kite is the one, isn't he?
Yeah.
The one that won when he won his major, and he said that his whole career had been a great golfer. Oh, it doesn't matter that I won't win a major. And then he turned around and he just said, "Yeah, actually, it really did matter." And David Moyes was the same, wasn't he, when he won the Conference League? You've never seen anyone so happy in your life because it was like, at last I've won a trophy. And Arteta has won a trophy, of course. We won an FA Cup, but there must be that sort of AP McCoy style doubt of like, is he ever going to win this thing in his own mind? And I suppose it's keeping himself motivated is a big part of it. I mean, he's a very motivated guy. Miguel.
But is a classic one of that actually almost Gareth Southgate, especially given that most of his job had been seen as the kind of psychological man management figurehead role rather than necessarily tactics. But to be fair to Southgate, and while I would have a lot of qualified criticisms of him, like with that England say, there was a series of psychological blocks, because this is what we're talking about, like getting over the line. And he does actually get over the line in numerous ways: penalties, beating Germany, getting past the quarters, getting to a semis, getting into a final. And yet then when he's actually in the final, I think it's the Euro 2020 one that is the big one. For whatever reason, they take the decision to step off. They don't press on the win. They lose control of midfield. And despite getting over the line in numerous ways, he doesn't get over the line in the one that matters most. So rather than it's actually also just similar with Diego Simeone in the Champions League with Atletico Madrid. And every time he plays Real Madrid in a big game, the closer they get, it feels, the more exquisite the failing, and the more this kind of supposed truth feels real.
So let's close out our Arsenal discussion there. Are we saying that Diego Simeone or Gareth Southgate could be the next manager of Arsenal? That's but you know what? You could see that both reasonable cases for that, you know. But there we go. We will do a short part 2 after this break. Welcome to part 2. We're actually going to close it out by following up with the discussion the chaps have had over the last couple of episodes about football's place as the world's biggest sport and how other sports have competed against it. Now, on Saturday, working for The Guardian, we had the busiest sports day of the year, and and very little of it was men's football, as we said, even though the Coppa Gianni was being played. But, you had the Grand Prix, you had cricket, you had Wimbledon, you had the Tour de France kicking off, you name it. It was absolutely massive. The British Lions playing, British and Irish Lions, I should say, Miguel, playing. It's this is the point of the summer when the rest of the sports take over in England as well, in particular. But I was just thinking about how other sports have competed with football. My view is that a few have tried to play the same thing and failed, really. Rugby union would be one where, I don't know, Miguel, you may be more expert on this. I feel that if rugby union had remained amateur as it was, I mean, it had to professionalise in a certain sense. A bit like the GAA model, where it's almost like a amateurism thing, isn't it? I suspect some of those lads that play GAA aren't actually working in the banks that they're supposed to. Is that right? I mean, it's
they give presentations of branches and this sort of thing. So,
motivational presentations and stuff like that. Yeah, but it rugby union. I mean, we've got the Lions, which is supposedly like the last vestige of the amateur game, and it's the most popular part of the game. The Lions, I was hearing, actually manages to fund Australian rugby for the next 12 years because. It's because of the sort of tour and the excitement of it, where it's a bit of a backwater. But you look at, say, I have this theory that when sports moved away from grandstand, which Rory mentioned in one of the episodes, moved away from us only having 3 or 4 channels, sports stars aren't as famous as they used to be. Kevin Keegan was the most famous man in the country. Who's the most famous English footballer now? Harry Kane. Well, he's not as famous as Kevin Keegan was he? Both John and I are cricket fans. Joe Root may be the greatest English batsman of all time. He's certainly the best of the 21st century. Joe Root could walk into my local, sit in a corner, no one would know who he is. And it feels like football has eaten the rest of sport. This is a bad thing, I feel.
I've long had a media-related theory about this, which is basically algorithms and actually the extent of data we have has killed maybe wider sport. Data kills the sports star. I don't know. Just because
as Buggles didn't sing.
As Buggles didn't sing, yeah. but okay, if you look at it, say you're on any media website, you can obviously track who clicks on what gets the most clicks. Well, we know actually it's football, and specifically it's football transfers. So what is the response to that then? Well, naturally, media organisations will devote essentially, people like it. Let's give them more of them. More resources will be devoted to that, which will obviously start to affect elsewhere. And I think it's a completely different form of media because, like I mentioned, the Sunday Tribune earlier in the podcast. When I was coming through as a young journalist, Sunday Tribune was a Sunday newspaper, and there was that sense like it's totally, I think, flipped the reader-media relationship. And I'm not just talking about newspaper here, but I think this is obviously, like, it's a parallel with grandstand, say. So when you open the newspaper on a Sunday, you were just flicking through it, you'd be obviously grazing the pages, and you might just start reading something you didn't actually know you were interested in, which is quite... Whereas now, I think there's obviously... And this isn't true for everyone, but I think there is a general thing. If you don't have a general interest in a topic, you're just not going to bother clicking on it, so you won't expose yourself to it. And I think this across media, this has created a self-perpetuating thing, which has accentuated the popularity of football, and actually within football as well, accentuated the popularity of a certain strand of clubs. It's kind of just this extreme concentration, and then like in that ecosystem, and you can see it across who pays what for rights. Everyone else is kind of fighting for that space. I think it absolutely is a thing. Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, to use actually an analogy that is used by people like Ferran Soriano within football, if you're in a race, say if you're in a boat race, if you're trying to catch up with the leader, you don't follow the same path as the leader. You have to do something different. And that's actually the lesson for a lot of sports, and why I think, as you've said, that the rugby example is so illustrative. And with rugby as well, I suppose what sounds like that sounds like an issue of scaling up at the wrong time.
Yeah,
certain elements were popular, so they tried to make the whole thing bigger, when that was completely, in hindsight, looks like the wrong move.
Well, it's funny, this great weekend of sport actually coincided with Oasis and Black Sabbath, those two gigs that,
as we can see.
But we were talking, of course, yeah. But we were talking figures just at The Guardian, I was told the figures on the live blogs for those were absolutely huge. As big as a big sporting event, as some of the biggest. It's sport is now this entertainment franchise, isn't it? That's the thing that we have. And there is a lot of specialism. I mean, like you have someone like, say, I'm a horse racing fan, as you know. Someone like, who's the most famous jockey these days? It's still AP McCoy. He retired in 2015.
Frankie Dettori.
Well, Frankie Dettori isn't retired. That's because of his financial issues. He's over in the States, but he doesn't ride classics in Europe anymore. Again, funny enough, that's in one of those documentaries that Netflix has made to try and get American racing kicked off in the same way as Drive to Survive and your golfing one and the tennis one. Everyone has to. They're all doing the same, aren't they? They're all pushing in these directions. And we've had all the football ones. We've had the story this week that, well, for a good reason probably, Manchester United have cancelled their documentary for the coming season. I wonder why. It's we're all part of this entertainment franchise, and football, soccer is still the daddy. But I think in all of us, we can see where the decline might set in. Jonathan.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Mikel's right. There's been this clear siloisation, and knowledge now, I think, generally is deeper but narrower.
Yes.
And so my Saturday afternoons, if I wasn't at a game, I'd just sit in front of the grandstand. I'd probably have Radio 2, as it was in those days, and Radio 5 on. And you'd have the sound down on the telly. You'd be listening to the score updates would be much quicker on the radio. You'd listen to the second half commentary on the radio.
I'd have the Rugby League on. Name.
Okay. Des Drummond, Martin Offiah, Joel Hayden.
Yeah.
Come on, I must be able to do more. Mal Meninga, the Australian.
Yes, of course, yeah. Andy Farrell, actually, coach of the British and Irish Lions. And I was thinking the two most famous rugby league players these days are Kevin Sinfield and Rob Burrow for humanitarian reasons, And rugby league is a sport, actually, if you think of it, that siloed itself quite successfully. It has had its financial problems, but it had to move itself to this almost specialism, didn't it? To go with Sky, to survive at a time when football had eaten everything, and it's managed reasonably well, but it's its own thing. Whereas people in the, you come down south, people will know Joe Lydon, Andy Gregory, all those names. Kelvin Skerritt, great name. Miguel.
Well, to extend the point I made there about kind of like, say, a newspaper presenting you with stuff you didn't know you were interested in, is this not actually the dilemma a lot of sports have? Like, exactly what you mentioned there with Sky, say, dilemma of whether to go behind a paywall or on a subscription service and to be on terrestrial television. Because just being on terrestrial television, okay, it mightn't bring the same broadcasting revenue, but suddenly you're exposed to, just because it does still remain true, and I think it's been especially true, say, with like women's football, with the FA Cup, that if it's on, people watch it.
But who are those people? Because one of the things that all sports talk about is getting the youth market. Kids don't watch TV. Kids watch YouTube. And so I found the cricket sort of... I mean, I know Rory's talking of 100 as a success, and I understand that tickets for individual games can be hard to get hold of, and in that sense it has been a success. But it's such a bizarre, convoluted form of the sport. Even people who followed the sport for years, I love cricket. I've played cricket all my life. I've watched it from being 4 or 5 years old. I find the 100 really hard to get my head around the new regulations. And they've one of the reasons they made it shorter is to get it on terrestrial TV. The terrestrial TV said we can't give you a long enough slot to even give you a T20. And so they're bending over backwards for the terrestrial TV channels. Yet at the same time, they're saying, right, we have to have a DJ there. We have to have loud music all the time. We have to bring in the youth market. Like, do kids really want that? Is that really... Yeah. And one of the things I find bizarre about modern sport is the lack of faith the administrators have in the sport itself. It's like, well, we'll put the sport on, but we'll have to have something else to keep them entertained, and then maybe they'll watch a bit of sport as well. Just show the sport. It's like, we don't need Dua Lipa before the Champions League final. Just show me the Champions League final.
God, here we go.
Having said that, if Dua Lipa wants me to come on a books podcast, I'm very much available.
Miguel.
on that point, I mean, maybe I'm about to expose myself as the sort of person that all these strategists should never listen to. But this obsession with the youth market, I have to say, I've never understood it. By the simple principle that I don't watch football in the same way, basically from the age of my early 20s, even my late teens, than I did when I was a 13, 14-year-old. You just don't. Your concentration, psychologically, your concentration span isn't the same. Like, this is all available research. So it's and actually by doing that, and we've seen this, we know because with like BBC Five Live, haven't they pivoted between different strategies, that just kind of trying to appeal to the youth, I say almost for the sake of it, means you're actually abandoning what is probably your core audience. Like, I mean, it's, you often see with those sort of things, multiple responses saying, well, get rid of the YouTubers.
Well, the idea, Five Live report on sport, it's let's have some reporters. That just became a bit of an issue. I think they've turned it around a little bit recently. But I mean, this is it. I mean, I totally get that Sunday paper thing of, like, I used to find, as much as I read the football pages, that sometimes the cricket writers, the rugby writers were better writers than the football writers. They had a better turn of phrase or whatever. And it's a sport I had very little idea about. I still have no idea about cricket, even though I go to it all the time. But that's it. Like, if you spend all your time on football, it's good to watch a sport where it could just wash over you. I still don't know the field placings on a cricket team. I'm sort of glad not to do so, really. It's just something that keeps it pure for me. Though I'm available for cricket writing if anyone would like. But it's that ability to enjoy all sports seems to be almost restricted to the Olympics or something, where people can just suddenly find themselves excited about a volleyball match or something like that. But it has been siloed, and the days when Carl Fogarty, Superbikes champion, was a household name are long gone. Because football has eaten everything, but for a very different type of celebrity. As I said, even the football stars are not that big stars in the actual, apart from your Ronaldo, Messi, who are, historic figures. Are football stars that famous? Sort of,
but the
yes,
stars,
sort of no.
They're stars in a different way, aren't they? So, I mean, Kevin Keegan was famous because he was releasing singles. Because he was appearing on chat shows, because he was doing his aftershave adverts.
Superstars.
Because he's on Superstars, exactly. Like, and the idea that a modern footballer would go on Superstar, I mean, Superstars, people who don't know, it was sort of like this multidisciplinary, sort of multi-sport. You get people from lots of different sports, and they'd have a cycle race against each other, they'd sprint against each other, they'd shoot against each other, they'd have a series of tests. And Kevin Keegan famously fell off his bike and kind of sustained quite
that's
severe.
That's probably what made him the most famous man in Britain. I mean, it was Stan Bowles, I think. You've got to watch out for watch that on YouTube. Were these people more approachable? I think they probably were.
They just had less money.
And they made less money as well. So he had to make his rather homoerotic adverts with Henry Cooper. That's where the money was in those days. Whereas there's a lot of money in advertising for footballers, but they have their own operation. Harry Kane has its own, extended Harry Kane universe, even from Germany. Miguel.
This is quite a wild tangent. Maybe you're best placed to answer, John. But say the way Oasis going on right now.
Yeah.
And I went to Bruce Springsteen at Wembley last year, and the way it felt like and a little bit like what we're talking about in terms of kind of this old-fashioned type of fame. Like the biggest music events felt like essentially bands from 30, 40 years ago, and people want to hear legendary hits. Is that going to be able to be replicated in the same way in 20, 30 years? Maybe for Taylor Swift, so we're well away from the core subject of this pod, but,
no,
but there are parallels.
It's a great point, but actually there are similarities in the fact that you do have your people that want to be seen at football and want to be, so like going to Glastonbury or whatever appears these days, apart from when the phone signal goes and they'll run out of battery, is just a series of Instagram pics of us, at the Stone Circle or whatever, and or I was at Bruce, here we go. I was at Black Sabbath, here we go. Those are the pictures that are. It's about this terrible phrase, living your best life. Yeah, that's football, entertainment, and music, and so they all sort of form part of the same thing. This sort of glot of, apart from if you go back into sort of grassroots stuff, but attending a Premier League game when you're not a season ticket holder or whatever, or you're just a tourist. It's all part of the same cycle, really, isn't it? And that we've seen, funny enough, we've seen Oasis dynamic pricing, and at the Club World Cup, we've seen dynamic pricing work the other way. That Adam Crafton reported on prolifically. StubHub must be wondering how often he pushes refresh on them. But anyway.
Well, I mean, even on that, like, Messi's become a bit like Bruce Springsteen, hasn't he? A tribute act to himself.
Yes.
That people go to just see to say, well, I've seen it.
I've seen Messi play, yeah. I mean, some of us were lucky to see him when he was much younger. But, yeah, I suppose... And that's not new, though, is it? I mean, when Pele went to America or so, or actually before, my father talks about seeing Pele at Hillsborough, playing for Santos. That was footballers would tour the world before it became this global game. Jonathan,
or even Bobby Charlton talked about when he would go to Newcastle as a fan. They determined where they went in the ground according to who the best player on the opposition was. So if the opposition had a good winger,
right,
they'd get down the front of that touchline so they could watch him in one half torment the fullback. If the opposition had a famous goalkeeper, you'd go behind the goal so you could see the goalkeeper. Or if they had a centre forward, you want to see him attacking crosses, you go behind the goal. So that idea of, I think we can have this sort of very, an ultra purist view of old fans. Old fans love celebrities, which is different because if you were a fan based in London and you had George Best coming to London, you'd go and watch him whether he was playing at Arsenal or Tottenham or Chelsea or Charlton or anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine, his dad said to me, he'd like Manchester United because they were just coming, and at the West Ham, the attendance would go up because he'd get to see Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law, and remember those are people that you probably read about in the newspaper rather than watched on the TV. It's a different style of celebrity, but it's always existed. It has existed way before television and radio. And I think that's where we should probably end it, as we've gone back into the Jonathan Wilson era of the 19th century, where we shall undoubtedly return at another point. But I should say at this point, yes, as said at the start, like, subscribe, comment if you should see fit. Email us, of course, at liberopodcast0@gmail.com. We will at some point do a mailbag episode, so keep those coming in. And you have the amazing prize of having an email read out on the Libero podcast. I mean, what could be a better prospect than that? But anyway, I should thank Miguel. I should thank Jonathan. I should thank producer Tom listening in here. And say thanks very much. And see you again soon.